Well, it seemed like everything kind of fell into place. Like you say, I've been a Sinatra fan forever.
Willie Nelson has never been a man afraid of speaking his mind. At 92 years old, the legendary outlaw of country music has seen and lived it all. Heartbreak, triumph, and moments so iconic that they've become part of American history itself. But now, as the years catch up with him, Willie is finally ready to open up about something he has held close to his chest for decades: the truth about his friendship with Kris Kristofferson. For years, fans have admired the bond between these two icons of country music. Together, they weren't just singers or songwriters, they were revolutionaries, pushing back against the polished image of Nashville and carving out a raw, authentic sound that spoke to the restless spirit of America. To the world, their friendship seemed unshakable, built on music, rebellion, and respect. But behind the scenes, it was far more complicated, filled with moments of unspoken tension, quiet admiration, and a deep loyalty that survived the storms of fame and time. Now, with nearly a century of life behind him, Willie Nelson is ready to tell the world what Kris Kristofferson truly meant to him. And what he reveals is both heartbreaking and beautiful, a reminder that even legends carry secrets of love, friendship, and regret. When Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson first crossed paths, country music was at a turning point. Nashville was still tightly holding on to its polished, formula-driven sound, but both men represented something far more raw, poetic, and unapologetically honest. Willie, with his rebellious red bandana and unmistakable voice, had already endured years of rejection, failure, and heartbreak before carving out his own lane. Kris, on the other hand, was a Rhodes Scholar-turned-Army pilot who walked away from a secure future because songs were the only thing he wanted to write. Their meeting wasn't just a coincidence, it was destiny. Both were outsiders in their own right. Willie was too unconventional for the Nashville establishment, while Kris was considered too intellectual, too rugged, and too different from the typical country songwriter. Yet, when their worlds collided, they found not only creative chemistry, but also mutual respect that would last for decades. Kris admired Willie's unshakable perseverance. Even when doors slammed shut in his face, Willie refused to compromise his artistry. He wasn't chasing radio play. He was chasing truth. For Willie, Kris represented a reminder that it was possible to live authentically and still make an impact. Unlike many in the industry, Kris had no desire to play by the rules. He was willing to sweep floors, fly helicopters, or work odd jobs just to stay close to music. What made their bond extraordinary was how quickly they recognized pieces of themselves in one another. Both men valued freedom over fame, poetry over popularity, and authenticity over approval. They weren't just friends, they were kindred spirits. The early 1970s was when their brotherhood truly took root. Kris's songs like Me and Bobby McGee and Sunday Morning Comin' Down had already established him as one of the greatest songwriters of his generation. Willie, meanwhile, was preparing to step into the outlaw country movement that would redefine his career. It was Kris who often encouraged Willie to keep pushing boundaries, to trust his instincts even when critics didn't. Behind the scenes, they weren't just collaborators, they were confidants. Long nights on tour buses, smoky bars, and quiet conversations over whiskey became the foundation of a friendship deeper than most fans ever realized. Willie often said that Kris had the courage to put into words what so many men felt but couldn't articulate. In return, Kris admired Willie's ability to turn even the simplest lyric into something that could touch the soul. Their connection went beyond music. They shared life philosophies rooted in independence, compassion, and a refusal to be boxed in. Both of them valued the idea that success meant living on their own terms, even if the world didn't understand. This mindset not only shaped their music, but also deepened their loyalty to one another. For years, fans saw them perform together at festivals, charity events, and intimate gatherings. But what they didn't always see was the unspoken bond, a sense of brotherhood that wasn't about competition, but about lifting each other higher. In an industry often filled with egos and rivalries, their relationship stood out as one built on honesty, admiration, and genuine love. Now, at 92, when Willie Nelson reflects on his life and career, Kris Kristofferson is a name he cannot separate from his own story. Their journey wasn't about headlines or chart positions. It was about finding someone who understood the weight of sacrifice, the beauty of imperfection, and the rare joy of creating something real. And as Willie opens up about Kris today, fans are finally learning that behind the music was a friendship that helped shape not only their legacies, but also the very soul of country music itself. As the 1970s unfolded, the friendship between Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson became more than a private bond. It became part of the very fabric of American music. The world was starting to notice that these two men weren't just artists. They were visionaries reshaping what country could be. Together, along with figures like Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash, they forged the outlaw country movement, a rebellion against the polished Nashville sound that had long dominated the airwaves. But for Willie and Kris, it wasn't simply about defying the establishment. It was about telling the truth. Kris wrote songs that cut to the bone, drenched in loneliness, spirituality, and raw human struggle. Willie sang them with a soulful grit that turned words into lived experience. When they performed together, the synergy was undeniable. Fans didn't just see two stars. They saw brothers who carried each other through the highs and lows of life. Willie often described Kris as the poet of their generation. He saw in Kristofferson's writing a depth that could rival the greatest literary voices. Songs like Help Me Make It Through the Night weren't just chart toppers. They were cultural revelations that dared to touch on vulnerability and desire in ways country music had avoided. Willie respected that Kris never wrote for applause. He wrote because he had to, because truth demanded to be spoken. On the flip side, Kris admired Willie's courage to sing and live without compromise. Willie's career had already weathered rejection after rejection before he found success on his own terms. By the mid-70s, Willie had become a symbol of creative freedom, a man who could draw 50,000 fans to a picnic concert in Texas, while the Nashville suits shook their heads in disbelief. Kris knew that Willie's bravery wasn't just about music. It was about life itself. Their shared respect turned into countless collaborations. They co-wrote, they recorded, and they stood side by side on some of the most legendary stages in history. Yet what defined their bond wasn't the spotlight, but the quiet moments in between. Backstage laughter, long road trips, and nights when fame felt heavy. These were the times when their friendship deepened the most. Fans often assumed that being part of the so-called outlaw scene was all about rebellion, whiskey, and wild stories. And while there were certainly nights filled with hard living, what kept the outlaws together was love. Love for the music, love for the truth, and, in Willie and Kris's case, love for each other as brothers. Unlike many artists who fell into rivalries or ego battles, these two lifted each other up. If one faltered, the other was there with a hand to pull him back. Kris once admitted in interviews that he looked at Willie as more than a friend. He saw him as a kind of spiritual compass. Willie's calm demeanor, his zen-like outlook on life, and his unwavering faith in music had a grounding effect on Kris. No matter how chaotic the industry became, Willie remained steady. And Willie, in turn, drew strength from Kris's unflinching honesty, both in his songs and in his life choices. Their bond was put to the test more than once. Fame brought pressures, personal struggles, and periods of exhaustion. Kris faced criticism for his gravelly singing voice and unconventional style, while Willie battled financial hardships and controversies. Yet through it all, they never turned their backs on each other. Instead, their loyalty grew stronger. By the 1980s, their brotherhood had expanded into one of the most iconic collaborations in music history, the Highwaymen. Alongside Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings, Willie and Kris became part of a supergroup that embodied the outlaw spirit in its purest form. On stage, the chemistry was electric. Off stage, the friendships were unshakable. For Willie, being part of the Highwaymen wasn't just about success. It was about standing beside Kris and the others as equals, united by love for the music and for each other. Looking back now, Willie admits that some of his proudest moments weren't when he stood alone in the spotlight, but when he stood shoulder to shoulder with Kris. To him, those nights weren't just concerts, they were declarations of unity, of friendship, of survival. Today, at 92, Willie reflects on those times with gratitude and a touch of awe. He knows how rare it is to find someone who truly understands the sacrifices, the doubts, and the triumphs that come with a life in music. With Kris, he found not just understanding, but a lifelong brotherhood that no stage lights could ever dim. As decades passed, life tested Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson in ways that no song could have fully prepared them for. Fame, as much as it gave them glory, also brought crushing weight. Both men faced storms, financial, personal, and emotional, that might have broken weaker friendships. Yet for Willie and Kris, these challenges only deepened the threads of loyalty binding them together. Willie, despite his massive success, endured one of the most public financial collapses in country music history. The IRS scandal of the early 1990s left him drowning in debt, $32 million owed, with properties and possessions seized. Newspapers painted him as a fallen legend, but Kris saw through the headlines. He knew Willie wasn't a criminal, just a man who trusted the wrong people with his finances. While the world judged, Kris offered quiet solidarity. When Willie recorded the IRS tapes, "Who'll Buy My Memories?" to pay down his debt, Kris was among the friends who stepped forward with encouragement and support, never letting Willie forget that his worth wasn't tied to money. Kris himself was no stranger to hardship. For all his success as a songwriter, he often felt the sting of criticism aimed at his unconventional singing style. Some radio stations dismissed his voice as too rough, too unpolished. But Willie defended him time and again, insisting that Kris's honesty mattered far more than polish. "A voice can carry a note," Willie once said, "but Kris carries the truth." That truth is what gave songs like "Sunday Morning Comin' Down" their haunting power. But their struggles weren't only professional. In their personal lives, both men experienced painful chapters. Kris went through multiple divorces, his marriages strained by the demands of fame and the weight of his own demons. Willie, too, wrestled with complicated relationships, often singing of heartbreaks that mirrored his real life. Yet instead of letting their private sorrows drive a wedge between them, Willie and Kris leaned on one another. They shared not just stages, but conversations filled with empathy, advice, and silence when words weren't enough. Their friendship also faced the inevitable challenge of time. The years brought not just wisdom, but physical tolls. Kris battled memory loss later in life, initially misdiagnosed as Alzheimer's before it was revealed to be Lyme disease. The condition left him struggling with cognitive issues, and for a while, the future of his music career looked uncertain. For Willie, watching his brother-in-arms fade in memory was heartbreaking, but he never abandoned him. Instead, he stood by Kris and celebrated every moment of clarity, every performance that proved his spirit was unbreakable. Meanwhile, Willie himself continued to push against age and health scares. He faced lung issues, bouts of pneumonia, and constant questions about whether he'd retire. But one reason he kept going, he confessed, was because of Kris. He couldn't imagine quitting when the man who once redefined country songwriting was still showing up, guitar in hand, ready to bare his soul. Their presence in each other's lives became mutual fuel, proof that resilience wasn't just about surviving, but about walking the path together. Their highwayman years especially symbolized this strength. Touring with Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings demanded endurance, yet the bond between the four men made the grind worthwhile. Willie and Kris often shared hotel rooms, long talks on buses, and quiet moments reflecting on what it all meant. The stage lights faded, the crowd went home, but the brotherhood endured. One of the most powerful demonstrations of their loyalty came during the tough times of Waylon and Johnny. Both men faced health struggles and declining careers before their deaths. Willie and Kris didn't just mourn them privately, they carried their legacies forward, vowing that the music they had built together would never be forgotten. That same loyalty, that same refusal to let memory die, has been at the heart of Willie's reflections on Kris in his later years. Today, when Willie speaks of Kris, he doesn't dwell on the hardships. They both know those are part of any long life. Instead, he emphasizes the fact that their bond survived every storm. "You can lose money, lose houses, lose health," Willie has said. "But when you find a friend like Kris, you never lose that. It's this unshakable bond that has carried them into old age. What began as respect between two artists turned into something stronger than fame, stronger than the trials of the industry. It became brotherhood, tested, tried, and proven unbreakable. At 92 years old, Willie Nelson has reached a place in life where legacy matters more than fame. The concerts are fewer now, the stages a little smaller, but the fire in his voice still carries the weight of a man who has lived through it all. In interviews, fans and journalists often press him about retirement, about slowing down, about the end of the road. But lately, when asked about what matters most, Willie doesn't talk about money or even music. He talks about Kris Kristofferson. It's only in these later years that Willie has begun to speak openly about what Kris truly meant to him. For decades, their friendship was seen through the lens of music, the records, the tours, the Highwaymen legacy. But for Willie, the bond went far deeper. He calls Kris the brother I never had but always needed, a man who understood not just his music, but his soul. That kind of connection, Willie admits, is rare, even among artists who spend a lifetime in the spotlight. What makes Willie's reflection so powerful is the honesty. He doesn't paint their journey as perfect. He admits there were disagreements, moments of distance, even years when fame kept them apart more than it brought them together. But when the noise settled, Willie says, "We always found our way back." That, to him, is the definition of real friendship, not perfection, but permanence. Kris, now 88, lives a quieter life away from the stage. His struggles with memory loss have made public appearances rare, and for fans who grew up with his raw, poetic voice, it has been difficult to watch. Willie doesn't hide the pain of seeing his friends slow down. "It hurts," he confessed in one interview, "but then I remember all he gave to the world." Songs don't forget. They keep him alive. To Willie, Kris's music is proof of immortality, a legacy that will outlive both of them. One of the most moving moments came during a tribute concert for Kris Kristofferson a few years ago. Willie took the stage and sang For the Good Times, one of Kris's most famous songs. His voice cracked at times, not from age, but from emotion. Those watching said it was clear. Willie wasn't just singing to the crowd. He was singing to his friend, as if speaking to Kris's heart across the years. It was a reminder that some truths can only be said through song. Now, at 92, Willie Nelson doesn't hide his greatest truth, that Kris Kristofferson was, and always will be, one of the most important people in his life. He has called him the most fearless songwriter he ever knew, the man who gave voice to the restless, the broken, and the dreamers of America. But beyond the music, Willie says Kris gave him something even rarer, loyalty without judgment. In an industry that often values fame over friendship, Kris proved that brotherhood was worth more than gold records. For fans, hearing Willie speak so openly feels like a gift. It's not just nostalgia, it's a lesson. Two men who shaped country music also shaped each other, carrying one another through the highs of fame and the lows of life. Their story is one of resilience, honesty, and above all, love, not the romantic kind, but the kind that keeps a man standing when the world tries to knock him down. As Willie looks toward his final chapters, he doesn't dwell on endings. Instead, he celebrates the bond that carried him this far. He laughs when he recalls the pranks, the wild tours, the nights they stayed up until dawn, writing songs that would outlive them both. And he grows quiet when he admits that Kris Kristofferson wasn't just a collaborator. He was the anchor in a life lived on the road. Willie Nelson has always been a poet in his own right, and at 92 his poetry takes the form of gratitude. Gratitude for the songs, the laughter, the struggles, and the friendship that endured it all. "Kris was the love of my life, in music, in brotherhood," Willie once said. "I wouldn't have made it without him." And so, as the years wind down, the truth finally comes to light. The outlaw legend, the country rebel, the man who outlasted the storms of fame, Willie Nelson's heart has always held a place for Kris Kristofferson. A place that no stage, no record, and no passage of time could ever erase.